This is really excellent work, Gabi. It's it's one of those interpretations that really, gets the whole feeling, the whole essence of the period performance, right? You just really went all out here. You've got your natural horns in F and trumpet in F and so on, and you really do stick to the formula, right? Open pitches and so on, and pitches that can be corrected with lip pressure and so on. You stick to very simple timpani pitches, just ones and fives. We'll talk a little bit about possible ways that you could have used, say, stopped pitches in your horns, and possibly retuned one of your kettles or used a third kettle to make certain parts more effective. But I feel that, all of that aside, there is such good scoring in this, and not just in terms of period practice. Like, there's so much inventiveness that you've got in here of recasting Beethoven's ideas, and you have the wonderful colors that both have, they ring with a kind of a period feeling, but they also have a lot of individuality to them. I can definitely tell that there's a lot of your voice in this, as well as you're paying homage to Beethoven. Yeah, just such nice work all the way through, and like lovely wind scoring and very nice, very playable string parts for the most part. So I would recommend to you very strongly, Gabi, that if there is a chance for you to try to get this performed, then you should take it, right? If there's any chance of, or like even just a reading or something like that, or if I remember correctly, you are in Central Europe, so that is there's a whole world of orchestras there that that are beyond the experience of a lot of other countries that have symphony orchestras. And if there's any chance for one of them to take a crack at this, to perform this, or even just play it in rehearsal for fun, I think you should take advantage of that. Because it is wonderfully done, and I mean it is as worthy of that as any other exceptionally well orchestrated entry in this challenge. Okay, so fantastic work, great work, really impressed. So having said that, it is now my duty to pick through your score and talk about how this could possibly be made ready for the stands, right? Let's say that you do have a chance to have this piece read or performed, right? How would you get this ready for the music stands, for each player to, I don't know, sight read it, at the end of a rehearsal, or to actually get ready to perform and prepare, and for the for the conductor to to have a copy of the score and look through it and so on. What would make this more ready than it is now? That is what we are going to answer with this enhanced evaluation at the beginning of your video here. Now, just a couple of more notes about the structure of this video, and that is, as people probably noticed just from the from reading the info or maybe looking at the little tabs in the timeline, that this video contains both movements, both first and second movement, and I'll have evaluation about the second movement, in hour and a half or whatever, however long it takes to get through this. And I've decided that that should be the standard for all of my dotted longa participants. It's just to have both movements on each video of each participant. And I'm going to I don't know how people are going to choose to view these, whether they'll just like look at one movement or the other, or just look at the mock-ups, or listen to it while they do their housework, or I don't know. I don't know how people are going to absorb it, but I'm going to take the most optimum road here, and that is that people are going to sit down, watch it on a big screen, or watch it on their smart TV, where they can really see the score in a really big display, and watch it all the way through. And if that is so, if you're going to be with us for 2 or 3 hours, then I should supply an intermission, which I have for this video and will continue through all 9 of these videos. Excuse me. Slight frog in my throat all of a sudden. So there will be a few minutes of intermission in the middle between these two movements, just talking about one aspect or another, one general aspect of orchestration, just to kind of as a palate cleanser, to to provide a little bit of an entr'acte, or and then after that we will go to the second movement. All right. So let the general evaluation notes begin. Let's start with this one here. Allegro ma non troppo. All right, and you put a little note here. Metronome marks follow Moscheles. Okay, so we've got a problem here, and that is that Moscheles was adding his metronome marks to these Beethoven pieces, not necessarily as a representation of how Beethoven intended his works to be performed, but how he recommended they be performed in his era, in the era of the virtuoso recitalist, right? So that is how fast, 138 is how fast Moscheles would be performing this, right? But that immediately brings us right up against the meaning of this tempo mark. Allegro non troppo, right? 138 is not non troppo at all. It is right in the middle of a nice brisk allegro, right? I've seen things marked con brio that are at 138, 138 to 144, right? And then you get above that, it's troppo presto or whatever, right? Allegrissimo, however you want, vivace, right? So this is on the fast side of allegro, 138. I would say like 144, right, would be as fast as I would mark an allegro, just saying allegro, right? Without kind of maybe adding other things, allegro con brio, allegro, and so on. And of course, a lot of that is just attitude, right? For Moscheles, maybe 138 was non troppo, right? But for an orchestra, it is definitely, it definitely is a fast allegro. And there are some things that you ask for in this orchestration that really are not so possible, are not quite, if not realistic, right? And there's also just the whole attitude of this piece. I mean, what is Beethoven trying to say here? He starts with this beautiful rumination, this beautiful meditation, right? He's at peace inside, and now he's going to say something, right? So is he going to say something really, really fast and then really, really rip through things and just really, really have a fun, exciting time? That's more like the second movement, right? This is like, this is his reaction to something, or there's something beautiful inside him, or beautiful as that he observes on the outside, like a walk in the country or some other kind of thing. There's the beautiful sense of nature or of natural, kind of a placid thing right in here. And I feel that when we take it way up to 138, we go away, we start to depart from the meaning of what Beethoven's score is trying to tell us. Okay, so while it's incredibly impressive, like, and the way, the speed that you have put it here, it really makes it feel, it has a certain, it sort of changes the whole nature of it to be this real virtuosic, real exciting, thrilling kind of interpretation. I would submit that it just is too fast, right? And I'm actually sort of dreading the fact that I'm wondering whether you watched this from the beginning, Gabi, and like watched your own mock-up as it was presented just for reference to what things I was going to say to refresh your memory. I almost wish that you hadn't. So if you have not, then that's a good thing, right? I don't mind so much about anybody else watching it, but you in particular, Gabi, as the most important viewer of this video, if you have not watched the mock-up and just jumped straight ahead to this commentary, then I would say that's a great thing. Go back to your file, don't listen to the mock-up, slow it down to 120, 126, and then have a listen to it. And just see if that, there's nothing that you've done here that wouldn't work at a what I feel is a more reasonable tempo, a more easygoing tempo, where the beautiful colors and the emotion of the lines can ring through. There's more time for the juiciness of the lyricism in a lot of these phrases to come through, and the simplicity, right? There's, like, when we get really, really fast, the simplicity, like the wonderful kind of, there's a sort of a Mozart-like simplicity to Beethoven at times, right? He learned his lessons well from Haydn, right? So I think we lose that when we just rip through this music. So that's my strong argument, and I'm not critiquing your desire to make it faster. If that makes more sense to you, I cannot contradict that. That's your choice. It's artistically, right? And that is tied to who you are, and I don't want to change that. But I would just submit that, especially if you are going to have this piece performed by, perhaps a semi-professional orchestra or a community orchestra, or, some really, really great university students or whatever, it might be better to have a more reasonable tempo. Okay? That's my first thought. So sorry that that's so long. Most of these are going to, most of these comments here, general and so on, are going to be a little shorter than that. But yeah, but one thing is, if you really, really insist on hanging on to 138, you have got to get rid of Mon troppo, because that doesn't make any sense, right? I would submit. Okay. So here at the beginning, there are a few examples of very widely spaced oboe, right? There's one here, and then here, and then here on this next page, we've got like this low D, and then like 2 octaves higher, high D, and then from there, it's not such a big deal. Octaves are no big deal, but really pulling, having the oboe players play harmony with each other, especially like an octave and a fourth, right? That creates situations where of course, oboe players are known for their beautiful intonation, but like it just, really separating the parts, and then with the lower part having a little bit more problem in their first octave or first half of an octave, with the precise dynamic control. This isn't so bad. These tenths are really nice, actually, but I'm just a little concerned about this. And I'll have a few more comments about that later on, but I'm just saying, watch out about spreading your oboes apart so vastly, right? It's not such a big deal with, like, bassoons, right? You might have your first bassoonist playing some stuff in tenor clef, and your second bassoonist, like, hanging around the bottom and so on. But that's because their functions are different, really, right? So. So I would just say, this kind of scoring, it may not be the safest for semi-pro, or community players. Okay, you have nicely proofed your entrances for first or second or ad due players in your winds, right? It's pretty nicely done. And I was like going through a lot of it kind of, looking at it myself and, really checking to see if you had done everything appropriately. There's a couple little things I'll comment on later, but so that is pretty well done. One thing that you didn't do was divisi and unison, right? And those are things that are pretty important. I would say, just looking at the totality of what you've done here, I don't see a lot of very easy non-divisi scoring. A lot of sixths and thirds. On higher pitches and so on. Those are the kinds of things that are easier to play as intervals. And of course, these could be played non-divisi, but there's no need at the dynamics that and the sort of the positions that they're at. So I would say just go through this and proof it for divisi and non-divisi and so on. Or sorry, not non-divisi, divisi and unison. And just really make sure to mark your unisons when the divisi is ended. This is something that a lot of, even in some professional parts, the part or the composer or the publisher or whatever just neglects to write in that it's unison. But I've had parts like proofed for me by orchestra librarians before before they're distributed to the players, saying you really need unison on everything, and especially if you have a situation where it's your score is going to get one reading and that's it, right? Or there's going to be no rehearsal time and it's going to be right, or it'll be right at the end of rehearsal. Everybody will have been like toiling with Bruckner for 2 hours and they've got 20 minutes to go over your work, which will be played at the beginning, right? You just really want to go over all of the different little things. The danger, of course, is that there will be like intervals and then a single line and then followed by intervals. And then if you don't mark unison, that the top player may just go ahead and play the line and the bottom player may just drop out, right? Because that is possibly what could be meant by that. So you need to go through and proof all that. Now, check for stem direction reversals. This is probably a copy-paste error. This like where you might have been taking the first voice from one of the parts and then changing it around a bit, and so on. And then it ended up with stems up instead of stems down and so on. So yeah, so just like go through, these stems should be pointing down, right? Instead of up. So yeah, so just, check for that. And then also look for inconsistency of voice distribution. You want to make things as absolutely obvious as possible. Let's see, bar 71 here. Yeah. So, in situations like, say this, where you have intervals and then you end with like a split stem, that's perfectly fine. And then, of course, reversed is fine. But having split stems and then an interval in the middle is not very good engraving practice, right? So this should be all split stems, right? Just for clarity. Stuff like that. Just look for things like that. Here's more examples of stems that are reversed, right? So just kind of go through everything and make sure, if you have to do it part by part, or flow by flow, right? Then definitely do it. All right, now let's talk about woodwind slurring a bit here, okay? I think it's right around here. Okay, so think about connectivity, emphasis, smoothness of line, right? So here you've got this tile, right? So really, you want this leap up here of a seventh to a trill. Wouldn't it be better to slur this and then hit the trill as a separately articulated note? Ta 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 ta, right? Doesn't that sound a little bit better than ta 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 ta, right? It just is. It's weird to play for the players, and I'm sure that there are players out there watching this who probably say, "Yeah, of course I can play that, Thomas." But do you want to play that, right? Wouldn't you rather that Gabi just ended the slur here and then you started the when you had to jump up a seventh, it was on a new articulation, and you got to trill in a just very natural way, right? So just watch out for things like that, where there's like a big gap and you're suddenly leaping up and doing another function, right? It's better to do that as a separate slur. And then we have the reverse at the beginning, and that let's see, here, dropping down an octave, like after, like, say, ripping up and then dropping down an octave, that's not the easiest thing in the world for your players either. And once again, clarinetists and bassonists out there, they might be saying, I can play that. It's not really a problem. But wouldn't you rather play it if Gabi ended here and then you tongued this separately? Of course, right? It's just so much easier. Ta ta, so much easier than ta el. Especially these drops of an octave. That's not the easiest thing in the world, right? So just generally speaking, I'll have some more words about this, but about the phrasing here in general, how it should maybe match up a little bit better. But these definitely should match, shouldn't they? Ta ta, right? Ta ta, right? Doesn't that make more sense? All right. All right. Now, there are a couple of things, a couple of approaches. Maybe it's just my taste or whatever, but I wasn't totally convinced by, by the, da da dum, da 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 da. I'm just. I mean, I really love Beethoven's original idea here. Maybe I'm just resisting because I feel that this is, this change might be just, not what I expect. And that's totally, it's totally fair if you feel, well, no, I just feel that this makes a lot more sense, right? And if it does, then great, but I don't, just like with the way that it like folds into the rest of the lines. Right? It's like I really love this stuff in here, like the way that you change things around for in Beethoven's ideas and so on. I think that works great. That's just sort of back and forth conversation. I think it's very clever, but I'm not so sure about this. Like especially with the trill not ending, right? Like with a little pickup note usually is leading somewhere, right? With proper voice leading, right? But it isn't heading back to to where it needs to go. So yeah, so that just feels a little strange to me. Same thing. Jumping ahead to the sister section here, the recap, right? Just not so convinced by the rewrite right in there. And then, but I think the biggest problem is the follow through. Da 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 dum dum. And then here da da dum. I think that the problem is that is that like the involvement of the oboe here is just basically is background, right? So there isn't any follow through of timbre, of like the melodic texture is so different from this, between this and this, even though you have this unison on a C sharp, that it doesn't, like, I feel like it feels like two separate ideas patched together because of the way that the strings immediately go to this fluttering right in here. And the oboes sort of pick up with an incredibly different character, right? So that just feels a little. I mean, at least you have the C sharp here, right? But then, like here at 74, or is it 76? 76. Da 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 dum. We don't even have the F sharp, right? We just have this D here. So like it completely feels disconnected, right? Because there's nothing following through in the, there's nothing carrying forwards what's going on in this secondary theme, right? So anyway, so those are my general observations of, a general evaluation to like things that possibly you could do a little bit of work on to get things a little bit more ready. Now let's go bar by bar with a few little observations. Then after that, I'll come back again and we will look through it section by section like a normal evaluation. It's going to be, it's going to be about an hour to 90 minutes per movement. So just, everybody just buckle up. You can see right on this YouTube video what the length of it is, right? So just, expect that, right? All right, so let's come back here to bar one. Talk about metronome markings again. Okay, the metronome marking should reflect the time value of the time signature, right? So you shouldn't be telling us what the eighth note pulse is. You should be telling us what the quarter note pulse is, right? Now, it is perfectly possible for, even for, say, a semi-pro community orchestra, university orchestra, to follow a beat of 38 beats per minute, right? That's just that's a whatever larghissimo, or it is a very slow tempo, but it is, or grave, but it definitely is something that players can follow because of the arm motion, as the tip of the baton and the elbow of the conductor move around. That is showing the players where the division of the beat is, right? Because there's a beautiful rhythmic motion. So you have got zero need to get into division with us here. Just give your players a 38, right? And they will be fine. And, Adagio cantabile. I mean, I guess like a lot of people feel like Adagio 72 to 76 or whatever, but it's very subjective for Beethoven. Now let's go back to low register second oboe here. So, like I said before, this is going to be a bit of an imbalance. I think that like if you want a completely beautifully balanced timbre from all of your instruments here, then the second line could easily go to first clarinet, right? And you would get just everything would be at their most optimum register, right? For this kind of thing. Now, there's no reason why you can't have a really great second oboe player with a lot of control. Somebody used to playing Scheherazade, right? or whatever, or a lot of Ravel, has got low, softer, lower oboe playing. So it's not impossible, but with this kind of just very, very fine, soft, carefully controlled kind of playing, where you might almost even go ahead and mark the horns at pianissimo, right, just to get everything absolutely balanced. You don't have to though, but I'm just saying, right? If you really want to finesse it, it's better off as a clarinet line. But it can work on oboe. It's just going to be some work, right? It might be easier on the oboist if you tie this, though, right? Anyhow, okay. It's still, E flat, F. There are some problems too with those pitches in terms of like finessing the ends of them, but any good oboist will not have a problem there. Now, there is something like I really wanted my orchestrators to really listen to all of the nuances of Spencer Myer as he performed it, because I feel that his interpretation is like one of the most orchestral I've ever heard. When Spencer plays a fugue or something with several, some kind of polyphonic music, each one of his groups of fingers playing each particular line has a separate character, right? Which is exactly what you want. So when he plays this ending, which is a very, very simple thing, his F lasts all the way to the end of the phrase, right? So it's written as an eighth note, but there's no need for you to hold on to that, right? And then he goes da-da, and he holds the A in the middle of the triad, doesn't he? and then he goes da da dum. So when he finishes playing, he's got an F, an A, and a C. He's got this beautiful F triad, and if you just like go to his recording and you start like when he's finished with all of this, and you just start it right on this note, you can hear that F triad, right? So that's what I was hoping people would pick up on. Just da 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 da. So in this equation, what you could do to rectify the situation is just turn this into a fermata F, right? And then go up to A instead of back to F here, right? And then you get your A continuing onwards to create your F major triad with a C an octave higher than usual, right? Which I think will work fine. So yeah. So as I'm going through making these suggestions, this might be something where you just like have a, I already said, hey, why don't you slow this down and listen to how it sounds slow. Just make another file with all these changes in it as we go along, and just like you can accept or reject, right? There's nothing about what I'm saying that I think you have to do, or else there's something wrong with you or whatever. It's not my job to say what's right and wrong. I'm just saying what I feel is more or less workable, right? So maybe try try that, maybe add that change and so on. Now, just in terms of like this entire thing here, maybe fermata over all of these quarter rests instead of under, right? I don't know how they got set to under. But yeah, this should have a fermata over it. All these rests should have fermatas. And then as far as this pausa is concerned, it can just be sitting here in the system text, right? Have your ritardando just end here, or don't even have the dashed line, right? Just say ritardando, pausa, and then allegro mono troppo. And then if it's in the system text, it'll appear in all the parts, right? Da 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 da. Da 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 da. Right? So the pausa is a great idea. Right? It's very, very nice. Okay. All right, so now you are just expecting this, I'm sure, Gabi, after having heard me scold everybody else about it, that leggermente should be included, right? So yeah, so this is dolce. Da, 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 da. This is leggermente. Da, 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 da. It's an attitude, right? It's like I am going to be sprightly and and energetic and dexterous, right? I'm going to ripple over these notes like a bubbling stream laughing its way over the rocks, right? This is Beethoven being pastoral, right? There's another reason to slow it down, right? It just, it's very much of a piece with the Sixth Symphony and other more evocative, descriptive writing that he did around that period. And of course, same thing here at 65. Should all be marked leggermente, right? Okay. Now, this is so convincing, Gabi. This little amount of emphasis played under the bass line or inside the bass line, that I just feel like you need something similar here, whether it's the timpani playing 3 Fs in a row, or maybe pizzicato double bass, or some other kind of thing. Because after I heard this, I felt its absence before, right? It's sort of in retrospect, right? And then in the repeat, people will be listening for it, right? That's another thing. So just consider whether it's timpani or pizzicato double bass, putting some kind of padding in there. Or padding is the wrong word. It's some kind of beat by beat pacing in there. All right. Now let's jump forward to here. Okay, so I really love the way this is orchestrated, and I'll have more to say about it in a little while. But I feel that you miss an opportunity here. Okay? Now, when Beethoven is playing that chord in his left hand, the shape of the chord is black keys on the outside and a white key in the middle, right? And then the white key resolves to a black key, right? So the accent is in the middle, and the way that Beethoven would be playing that chord on most pianists is they would put a lot of weight on their middle finger. So that means that the note in the middle is what is sforzando more than any other part, right? Da 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 da. And the problem here is, as beautifully orchestrated as this is, there is so much emphasis on other parts in the sforzando that we cannot really hear the dissonance resolving, right? You have, the weakest or the most discrete string instrument playing in on very low pitches, right? And then the clarinet right in the middle of all of this other, like this more aggressive kind of stuff happening in the upper winds, and and horns kind of blasting away here and so on, and very close by that we've got the oboe and the clarinet both playing these sounding Ds and so on. So we're just really not hearing this very powerfully, right? So you've got horns here. You could have them. You have one of them, anyways, playing the stopped, stop notes, right? That could give you that kind of snarl that you want there. And you could. There are other options you could possibly do, but I feel that you need way more emphasis on that, right? And I don't think you need to really slur it. I think you could go, rather than going ta ta ta, you could also go ta da ta da. Like if you're not going to slur this, you shouldn't slur that. That's my feeling. Okay, and then we have the same situation jumping ahead here at 80, right? And here it's even weaker. We just have two clarinets, top of their Chalumeau register, surrounded by so much other emphasis that, even if it's soft in some parts, right? Timpani and so on. But, like all of this other stuff, these furious sforzando accents and everything else, right? It's just a lot, and this hardly comes through at all, right? It's a bit like a couple other issues we were having, of specific parts being hard to hear. All right. So back to the whole issue of timpani and of this section, right? So I really love like the way that you just drive up the energy here, right? So you got this bum, ba-bum, 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 kind of thing happening. And I think it's so exciting. And then all of a sudden you just pull the rug out from under us, and you have the only thing that we have that is doing anything furious in this bar is we've got a trill here in the violas. Once again, not a very strong instrument in the sound picture. In a area where it's going to get outshouted by other instruments around it, right? And then we have this trill here in first clarinet. In first clarinet, there's these other instruments are going to be sort of playing around it, right? So we have a bit of a problem here, right? Just in that that it's just very there's a lot of paint peeling stuff going on here, but it is no longer fast and furious. It's just solid notes, right? It's footballs, as they say, and half notes, or minims. So it doesn't really have the same energy as before. Now, how did you solve this problem in the recap, right? Let's jump forwards. And you have this wonderful solution here. And that is you have this big fat roll on the 5, right? On the C. And that gives you the energy that you need here. And I think it's just terrific It's just terrifically invigorating and powerful, and it makes up for the fact that you have stopped playing, you've stopped doing all of this energetic scoring, right? Okay, so let's go back to this problem here. So in order to get the 5, you'd have to have a G, right? All right, so let's say that you're playing by the rules and you just have your 2 kettles, but you are being, this is being played by, it could be a period orchestra, it could be a contemporary orchestra, but like willing to do a sort of a period type thing to a degree. In either case, this F can be quickly tuned up to a G and rolled as a G, and then it can be retuned back down to F, right? It's a basic thing, whether it's a couple of hand cranks, right, or whether it's a pedal change, right? This can be changed up to a G with no problem. You've got plenty of time here, I think, for at least for a pedal change would be. And like if the player knows how far to crank each hand crank on top of a more of a period kind of timpani, then they will know like how to set it to get the G and then how to bring it back to get the F. They might want to listen to it to reset it here. But I think that they could give you that G. Okay, so I don't think that there's a problem with you writing a G in here, and that's the only way I think to save this in terms of the energy. So a half solution would be to leave this alone, but to put in unmeasured tremolo with an accent here in your lower strings. Both of these going, hitting these G's and going, right, and that'll give you the energy that you need to follow through here. But I think other than that, right. Okay. So let's check out some finer points here. Okay. So I feel that right in here, you've got this ta 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 ta, and you could do the little da 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 there at the to finish off the trill. So I feel that that's beautifully expressive. So there's no need for you to cut off the articulation of the downbeat here by slurring across the bar in your winds. Just think about it. Ta ta ta. Isn't that better than ta 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 ta? Isn't it better to land on it with a ta? Right? And you can get rid of this, right? So just slur these, slur these bars. Okay. And then ta ta da da. What's the original piano part? C. Right? So you're, not only are you slurring across here and taking away the emphasis of the downbeat following the bar in all parts, except for down here, which is it's beautifully done here. So the winds are not matching the strings, and they are not giving you the resolution here. There's no voice leading here, right? Da da, right? Like we're giving. Beethoven wants to express the mediant for an A flat chord, right? And then subvert it harmonically. Right? So I think that like by not giving us the C here, right, that you're causing some problems there. And also by slurring. Just, So watch out. Okay. Flat sign over the trill. Right? Rather than just having the trill. Did you notice how your mock-up played this back as an augmented second? Right? So this, in other words, the distance of a minor third. But it's, it interpreted what should have been the E flat following as an E natural because it didn't have the flat sign above it, right? Or I don't know how Dorico chooses to do this. Maybe it has a flat sign following, but one way or the other, this has to trill a whole step rather than just assuming because we are in the key of F that this is going to trill to an E, right? Which would be part of the key signature. So you have to indicate a flat somehow on the upper note. And I would put in the little, the little recovery grace notes at the end. All right, now this is beautifully done. This ta 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 and so on. There's this little reinforcement of what's going on in the strings. Okay, it's lovely. Okay, one little problem though is that I feel that it is overslurred. Right? What do these players need? They need a kick in the pants. They don't need some people suavely playing little clever ideas behind them. They need bum ba bum tan ta ta tan ta tan. What's they're going? They're going. You know what I mean? They need this nervous energy to continue. And the people behind them are just being a bit random. Ta 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 doo dee doo and so on. So I just feel that it needs to be, either slur this far and then have the downbeat or the middle beat articulated, or just get rid of the slurs entirely, right? And just really give the players some more rhythmic support there. Sorry, my other screen fell asleep, and I have to, since it's on another system, I have to occasionally re-enter my my password. All right, so back to this. So yeah, so just I feel that it needs to have more precision of purpose with it, rather than just slurring across. But but nicely done, and this is the way to do this, right? Have the second voice below rather than this going ta ta thirds, right? Well, I mean this actually does make sense because of the you're trying to stay within the what's possible for open pitches. So that's all fine. Yeah, and this is lovely right in here with the trumpet and the yeah. You might not need duet trumpets, but we'll talk about that when I get to when I come back and look this over section by section. Okay, and then right in here, you don't need split voices here. Just say a duet when you get to the the two voices. It's just much easier to read. Of course, this needs to be scored the way that it is, but these other parts could be all just single in first voice and a duet. And you could even do that here. You could just say one and then a duet here, right? That's perfectly fine. All right, so the big problem here really is the workability at 138 of this right in here. It's just insanely fast, and it is possible for really, really, really good players, but it is almost like not even, I mean, what does it really add to this? If you leave it out, it still has a beautiful, furious sound at that high tempo. Watch out, you have a collision here of a crescendo intended for, I guess, like here's your first, so this would be intended for second voice and so on. So, yeah. So I would say just like have your crescendo go to here and stop, and then mezzo forte crescendo to fortissimo, right? Just like you have here. Okay, so I wouldn't add this unless it were at a slower tempo. Like if it's at 120 or 126, then it's totally possible and it will sound very exciting and fun, right? Or if you're determined to keep it at 138, I would say don't even bother with this unless you add a rallentando here at the end, and just add it to the last couple of beats, or maybe last three beats. Like say rallentando starts here, then kind of start this coming in, right? Especially with a more rapid rallentando, a tempo, right? So, anyways, just a thought that's just not all that feasible, especially not with semi-pro players. Okay, yeah, and then just a little bit like here, I would say I would just for better score reading, I would put in a second voice rest and then the number one right here. Okay, that's just easier. Or perhaps you intended this to be this, so in that case, just rewrite it. All right, just a couple more things. You probably noticed right in here that there was kind of an organ-like sound coming from your mock-up. And that is because of the stacking of your brass playing exactly the same parts an octave apart, right? And especially with these open fourths, right? Kind of stacked on top of each other. That's giving things like and to be completely honest about it, this organ-like sound will actually show up in the live performance as well to a degree, right? So the way to avoid it is to maybe like try to vary the pitches a little bit. Like for instance, like maybe this could be an E instead of a C, right? So there's little teeny adjustments that you could make to this, right? Then one last little thing. I'm seeing a lot of scores, especially here towards the end of this round of evaluations, where a lot of people are choosing to end like boink, 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 and it just reminds me of a bunny rabbit bouncing around through the fields, right? And if you listen to pianists play this same thing, they play it as they play it with marcato accents, right? So it does have a staccato feeling to it, but it is accented, right? It's bam, 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 right? It's, there just needs to be more of a direct sound here, than a bounce, right? So consider it, right? Consider replacing the staccatos with marcato marks or just accents, right? But one way or another, I feel it needs to have more, just more dig to it. More, it should be just more aggressive, I think, and maybe just a little bit more duration to it, right? Rather than just going doink, 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 right? There's also the whole issue too with with a string staccato, like it'll be a short note, it'll be a short pull on the bow, right? And that it's just that doesn't really have a whole lot of projection, or it doesn't have a very firm. It doesn't have the same firmness of sound as say you would get from a marcato or from an accent. All right, so just some thoughts there. So now let's go back up to the beginning, and we're going to analyze this, just completely playing fair, using the evaluation criteria that I have collated and that we saw at the beginning of this video. So, first of all, our first obsession, concern, criterion is does the intro set the mood effectively? And I feel that it absolutely does. I mean, I love the idea of sending your oboe all the way up to this D. It's lovely, that just real beautiful piping sound, and that is all the more reason, why I feel this need to slow things down, because it is such a pastoral sound. Do you know what I mean? It is so Sixth Symphony, right? So, I mean, I feel that, that at such a high speed, this sort of beautiful walk in the country becomes sort of like a race, like kind of almost like a foot race. So, and this is it sets things up so beautifully for, a meditation, I don't know, Beethoven did a lot of his work walking around, right? He actually had a little sketch pad that he would carry with him, and he would, he knew all the highways and byways, and he walked all over Vienna, and sometimes he would walk to the house of somebody he was going to teach and teach them, and then walk back. And sometimes he would walk out to his favorite little tavern on the outskirts where there was a little wind band that would play little ditties and little folk tunes from his native Bonn, and he just loved those guys, and he would try to work them into his symphonies. Like you, in his symphonies, there are lots of little wind breaks, right? And so that's him paying homage to these to these little folk musicians, right? So, like you could almost say that this is almost like those little folk musicians right here, right? So it really fits in beautifully, I feel. And if that's so, then, having a kind of a slightly awkwardly low oboe in there is, I mean, it kind of fits, sort of. Sort of fits. I mean, of course, like a clarinet would also fit there, but I mean, it doesn't have to be clarinet. So yeah, so it is a lovely idea. I would say, I remember I was recommending that you think about tying this, and the way that it's scored right now, it's a kind of a semi portato, right? Because like you're slurring across repeated notes. So those kinds of things occur in period scoring, in classical period scoring. But like, yeah, I mean, I would almost prefer that my orchestrators were thinking about it, right? Like when we just slap a slur across it, across repeated notes, I always feel like my orchestrators have not thought about it, right? Like, because if this is meant to be beautifully placid and tranquil and slowly emerging out of the warm darkness or whatever, then wouldn't it be better to tie that C and that A, right? So, anyways, just like think about it. Maybe you don't. Maybe like you don't need to slur the first beat at all. You could go ta ta ta, and then don't slur past there. Just go slur ta ta. Right. So maybe avoid repeated notes in your slurs. That might be a way of making it more, just having more eloquence, so just keeping that in mind, I would say, so that would make it the most effective for me, for my particular obsessions and so on. I would shorten the slurs here and move them forwards here, right? Either that or turn this into a tie and maybe make this portato here for your first oboe, and this as well, or just make this into a quarter note. Okay, so that would check my box for for the first criterion. So now let's move on to, does the melody start with elegance? Okay, and here you have this lovely yeah, there's a missing element here, and that is the middle C, right? Going C C C, and then here, we don't have that beautiful big chord, right? And it would be so easy for you just to throw in like a double stop here on the E, you know, and then here like to have this be like a B flat second, just a B flat and a C stuck together, right? Or have your second violins go divisi and go C C C C, and then you don't have to put the C on top here, right? So this could go C C C, maybe in portato, and then this could be an E diminished fifth, right? And then you get your beautiful C seventh chord there. So that's the only thing that is missing there. So I feel that like, I really love the slurring patterns here. They're spot on. You read my mind of what I think would work really well here. Right? So that's beautifully done. I mean, and when you think about it, it's just only logical, right? We can't take too much credit. That's what a string player would probably want. So yeah. So there just needs to be that middle C in there somewhere from somebody. But I like this little pattern. Is there a natural flow? It's not really a flow. It's more of a, of a kind of a nice kind of rustic bouncing around, and I think that works great here. And then this is really lovely. Is there a natural transition to octaves? Well, you already have octaves going on, so obviously yes. Do you expand without clogging up? I mean, yes, you do. I mean, and especially considering the fact that that you don't really have anything else going on in any other instruments, and you don't have any double stops or anything like that. So I feel that this works really, really well. I think it is beautifully eloquent, right? So this ticks all of the boxes on my evaluation criteria. Now, does this contrast with a theme? Yes, it does, beautifully so, right? And then does it contrast between the lines? Yes, it does. Like, so like theme and oboe, theme and violins, theme and flute, answered by bassoon, right? Plus cello. And then the violins answer the flute with viola plus clarinet, which is a beautiful combination. Okay, and then so that do you need harmonic support there? You don't need any harmonic support, you feel, and I think that that's perfectly fine. So now here, like, do we have an emphatic color of line? I mean, it is really kind of an interesting idea. First flute. I mean, so how big are you going to get? I think that you should really tell your players how big they're going to get, and you can move this. Crescendo back and then mark whatever this is going to be. Whether I would say if you're not intending to go above mezzo piano, don't bother marking it. But mezzo forte, perhaps, I think would be a nice kind of direction to aim for. And then here, piano subito, right? Jump back to it in all parts, right? Because the way that you've got it here, strictly speaking, your bassoonists are at least going to be playing mezzo piano throughout, right? While everybody else is marked piano. And the same thing is true here with your cellos, right? They're going to think that they're at mezzo piano. So you got to fix this. So does the scoring in these lower parts set up the harmonic density? It does, because you're not really aiming for a big sound here, and I think that that's really lovely. Once again, like, I feel that you are capturing some of the spirit of Beethoven here in his pastoral scoring, right? Not just the pastoral scoring of the pastoral, but his ability to process nature and the feelings that are instilled in us by our observations of nature. He just was such a powerful composer in that regard. Okay. And then, the question is, like, are you going to contrast these sections, right? Is there a contrast of texture and dynamic and approach and everything else? Or are you going to go back and forth and so on? And you do choose to do that. And I think that it's very effective. I already commented on how I feel that there needs to be some kind of punctuation here that matches what the timpani is doing before. It does not have to be in timpani, right? It could be pizzicato basses, as I mentioned before. Right? So, and then pluck, just a little bit of doubling on the top pitch here, perhaps staccato wind. And then this is so lovely. I actually love this. If you can pull it off, right? The C in clarinet 1 and da 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 in oboes and tenths and so on. That's such a really lovely idea. And the bassoons diving down in octaves. Right. I think that's just a really great idea. And then bump with your horns. Done. Yeah, so it's beautifully scored, perfectly scored, just really very, very much in the period. Done. Then here, da 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 da. It's like, if this is going to be sforzando, do you want to push into this a little bit dynamically? Right, and then maybe pull out again. Da da da. Or maybe you could go da 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 da. Maybe have a couple of pushes here, right? Especially considering you go sforzando here. All right, and then I already commented on kind of a slight lack of continuity here in the theme. So let's not worry about that too much. But there was one concern here. Is this a fresh new color? I would say, like strings and octaves, strings and octaves, right? So if you really wanted to vary things around, you might want to think of, who else could be doing this. But I mean, I don't think you need to obsess about it too much because we had a little wind obad here, right? And then we had a string opening, and then we had basically a wind dominated answer, right? And then pizzicato, and then we're coming back to arco. So I feel that it does provide enough timbral variety. It's just my humble opinion. And then like you reinterpreted it here without having to worry too much about patterns, and I feel that it's very, very powerful. One little thing though is that like I think you get way more energy out of this if you don't slur it. Right? So like here you don't slur. You just go. So I think you get that same energy here. Just little like Mendelssohnian kind of a thing, as opposed to But I mean, it does, it works fine. I just think you don't have to slur it if you don't want to. Okay, and then this is lovely. I mean, it's like if you can find a way to connect the two ideas a little bit more, a little bit more smoothly, then I think that this is excellent, the way that it's scored. Then bum ba da dun da da dun da da. Maybe maybe this doesn't need to be slurred, or maybe ta 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 doesn't need to be slurred across the across the middle and end of the bar. Especially when you consider that you're going ta 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 ta, right? Maybe this should match in terms of the articulation, so that you can really hit this sforzando and it isn't coming at the end of a slur. And I've already talked about the need for this to stand out a little bit more. But, just looking at my criteria, you have a complementary timbre here, coming in under the melody, right? With the, from oboes to clarinets. And then you are thinking ahead to widening the gap beautifully. And then, then the gap widens further. You do that very, very well. You open this out, right, to a forte, and then fortissimo. You spread the harmony out here. You do not leave a big hole in the harmony. So, like, it's just really, really well done. I just wish there was more, I mean, it's perfectly fine to have your violas trilling here, but maybe they need a little bit of help. Here's a crazy idea. What if you had your violas trilling in octaves and your clarinets trilling on octaves, and a roll on the G here in the timpani? What do you think? Anyways, something to try out with your mock-up, or just like think about in your head. Yeah, and this is going to really blaze. This really, that maybe you just need one single trumpet there, right? And just split the parts here. Right. What you really need is a you need a sounding G here. Yeah, so I mean, they kind of don't have any options there, but yeah. Anyway, but I don't think you need a duet up there. This is fine though. Okay. So well done, section B. So now let's continue forwards. New quality of tone. Yes, we have oboes and clarinets working together. I really love the idea of the clarinets being over the oboes, or first clarinet being over the first oboe, and then kind of answered by bassoon and so on. I think this is really, really effective scoring. And then just answered, flute and oboe. Very, very cute. And this is very, very cool. The violins coming in right under. I think you should push forward here, right? And so crescendo to a forte rather than, because I mean otherwise there's kind of almost no need for the violins to come in at all, because their sound is going to, kind of be complementary to the sound of the flute here, right? The ear of the listener will follow. Right? So, but if the strings come in and they just start, or the violins come in and they push forwards, then I think this is way more effective. Portato in your second horn here. Ba ba ba, so good, it's just so great scoring right in here. And and then answered like these are like the same octave, right? And I was kind of complaining about this in a couple of previous evaluations, but since you changed the color, right? Like honestly speaking, it would be better for this to be like for the highest note of the strings here to be as high as the second violin here, so that like it could be answered an octave higher, the way that the hands in the piano part move upwards, which I feel is a beautiful dramatic contrast. But since you have there's just such a vast change of color, then I think that that is the contrast that you need to make this work, right? So yeah, and I do a oboes here. I think this is great. Same with the flute on top. Yeah, and then and so on, and you've changed this around a bit, which yeah, I've already talked about. And then and this is very cool. The call and response that you've got here with a little staccato viola behind. It's just such great ideas here, Gabi. I mean, it's sort of like this is one of those scores that makes me want so much to say, oh, wow, I just can't wait to see what you're going to do with next year's orchestration challenge. I can't promise that, right? I'm sorry I can't. Oh, I just so much want to. I feel like doing one that's like a memorial to my mother, right, who passed away in September last year. But yeah, I'd have to pick the piece that she loved the most, right? So maybe not. I don't know. We'll see how we go. Okay, and so I feel that this is all really strongly scored, and I feel this is a great way to recap, especially like you've sown the seeds right here with this viola part of returning to that accompaniment and so on. Just so cleverly done, right? Once again, not totally convinced by this, but maybe it would grow on me. But all the same, you need to normalize the dynamics here, and maybe destination dynamic of mezzo forte and piano subito. And then, like here, you wouldn't need to mark it across the. Well, I see what you're doing here. You're giving this as the repeat dynamic. So, what's it say in the first ending there? Yeah, see, if you have it in the first ending, you might not need to mark it at the beginning, right? But then again, like if depending on how the parts are scored, or the parts are distributed, the layout, D might be at the top of the page, right? In which case you do want the dynamic there. Okay. So, so we've talked about a little bit about a little bit of this already, but nice phrasing here in the strings. I feel that the winds maybe should match a little bit. This could actually be portato across here, just like slur across here, and then tenuto marks over these to kind of give it that kind of nice pulsing sound, but end the slur here in all parts. And yeah, and just like you're kind of taking a similar approach that you did before at the beginning, and that works perfectly fine. I kind of had a recommendation. Is it better to be more intimate here? Simple yet tender, and you've chosen to be more expansive, and I think that that's fine. But if you're going to add the expansiveness, once again, you need to finish. You need to finish your melody on a C, right? Da 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 C in some of these parts. Doesn't have to be all of them. This could just go straight to an E flat here. Yeah, but I mean, I can see how that would sort of emerge, like the this whole idea would emerge from the way that the piano part is scored, except for the fact that like if you stack an octave, you still have to end on a, maybe you can just rethink the harmony here. So, I think this is pretty well done. This could probably push into this forte here. Bum, 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 bum. Yeah, because right now it's just very sneaky. Da 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 da. If you listen to, what does Spencer Myer do there? He pushes, he anticipates. So he puts in a little crescendo there, right? Maybe instead of pianissimo, like it's pianissimo before, right? But maybe this could be piano crescendo forte, right? So it emerges out a little bit more naturally. And for that matter, this could, these repeated notes could also crescendo if you wanted to, without any damage done. Da 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 dum. Piano subito, right? Bum bum bum. Da da dum. So we already talked about this. This is all great. All of this back and forth stuff. Yep. Yeah, and I feel that this all works pretty good. This ba-da-da-dum, ba-da-da-da-dum, da-da-da-da. Yeah, I really love the way that you're just throwing little bits and pieces behind the strings. I just think that's really powerful scoring, and just very natural transition to these octaves, and just keep stacking and stacking and stacking here. That's really, really nicely done. It leaves a bit of a gap here, though, doesn't it? Maybe you could jump up one of your oboes, right? Because we end up having like a kind of a hole in the sound picture here. Even by the trumpets, right? So the trumpets they're not filling that hole, which they could really easily do, right? So yeah, maybe you could jump up an octave here with your oboes, right? And even, but maybe just leave your strings the way they are. Yeah, and I love the instruments that you've chosen to sit on the sounding C here. That's great. And this, of course, is just really lovely. The roll here that tapers off. Da, 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 da. Yeah, it's very cool. So people will notice that I didn't jump ahead to E and then compare it to the previous sections, and I just went ahead to D, and I just feel that that works for this particular evaluation. So, but now that we are at E, let's jump back and remind ourselves of what Gabi did at the beginning here, right? We had the octaves and the little chat going on here in our middle strings, and and the kind of nice opening out here at the high cello, and yeah. And then there was the little flute answered by bassoon and cello, and then violin answered by viola and clarinet. And then the little, the little winds, bum bum bum, pluck pluck, da da da, pluck pluck, right? And finally settling on these strings. All right, so now let us jump forward to E. Actually, the pick up to it. So here, I really love that you're going to this. This has been used by a couple other orchestrators, but I love the harmony here. That's just so effective. Da 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 da, and it's just you fill in any gaps here. It's beautifully done. Da 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 da. Yeah, and that boom 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 boom. It's just so beautiful and tranquil. See, like now imagine this, like especially this. If you have that copy, Gabi, down to 120 or 126, just listen to it right here, and just listen at the power there, the lyricism and the the beautiful placidity, that's just like Beethoven at peace, right? And then he throws in a joke, right? Okay, so before we had flute answered by bassoon, here we've got oboe answered by cello, and violin answered by bassoon, and then clarinet answered by viola, and then flute answered by cello. Right, so it's just wonderful dancing around, and I think that it's a lovely use of the different different colors and different registers. Yeah, just put in the leggermente, right, and you're sorted. But yeah, and once again, you don't need any you know you don't need any harmonic support or development or anything like that. So so remember that this was all winds, right? And here we've got da 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 dum bum bum. So very very powerful, intense unison violins here, and flute, right? And I just almost feel like I mean, you've got enough weight here, so you don't really need the oboe, but it wouldn't hurt to bring it in so that it's just naturally coming out of the phrase into this fortissimo. Do you know what I'm saying? So you have a single flute here, so you could have a single oboe, right, just coming in here on the B flat, and then when the parts split, when they split apart here, then the oboe going down and the flute going up. I think all you need is a single oboe, right? And just to give it a little more color here, and then coming out of it with the kind of the chorale. And here you very wisely stick with octaves, right? And bum bum bum, just really expansive here on the winds and the horns and trumpets. Really really effective scoring, and then just answered little bit of toot toot, bum bum bum, toot toot, or pluck pluck. Right. And then once again, I would add a little teeny bit of weight on top of here in some staccato instrument, not flute, either oboe or clarinet. But it could be pianissimo behind the piano, but it just has to be a teeny bit of color. Yeah, and then just like continuing to answer, right? Call and response, call and response. Yeah, that's all. I feel it's nice scoring there. Yeah, then ba ba ba, plunk, plunk, thump, and then once again, string octaves. Let's jump back and we'll just look at the B section, how it was scored. Just to remind ourselves, we had the octaves, right? We had a little support from oboes and clarinets at the beginning. Then we expanded out here. We had the little scurrying strings, and then the scurrying high strings and staccato middle strings, little pizzicato in the bass. We had the parts in contrary motion here, and then and then a touch of horns and trumpets and so on, timpani, sforzando, and then pushing forwards, and then the sort of dun 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 and so on. And we talked about the roll and so on, and the trills. Okay. So now, let's look at the recap here. So, once again, strings and octaves, or violins and octaves, kind of same idea as before, oboe and horns and trumpets, kind of doing this. This is actually pretty good. The oboe and trumpet right here playing together. Right. You might just need horn. I don't know if you really need the trumpet there, but it's very, very cool the way that, I mean, you don't have to take it out. It just, yeah. If you don't want this to diminuendo, like the players are going to be listening to their mates diminuendoing, then you have to write subito here. Right, and then, yeah, just like kind of a ditto of what happened before. Slightly different handling of certain parts here. Yeah. Yeah, it's more developed. It's nice. It's a nice expansion of what was going on before. Yeah, and a big kind of explosive, and then the roll makes everything make sense. I'm noticing that a lot of people chose to go crescendo to fortissimo, and then forte on the next bar. Right? It should be the other way around. Seriously. Okay, so Beethoven. I mean, there's no need for you to pull your punches. It's like it just feels backwards, right? And then just suddenly this softer thing, and this happened in 3 or 4, and I'm wondering if this is reflective of a different edition, where the dynamics were reversed for some reason. So, anyways, but reverse them back. Okay, you only need to get up to forte here, and then really lay on the fortissimo, because with the way that you've chosen to take the energy out of this, no more repeated notes or tremolo or anything like that. It's very anticlimactic, even with the timpani roll. So just reverse things back, I would say, and you're going to be fine. Okay, so now let's check out the C part. Right, so it's oboe under clarinet, and then trading off to bassoon, flute over oboe, and so on. And then this, strings and horns. Ba-da-thump. Oboe, and then so on. Yeah, the flutes sort of cascading downwards and then talking to each other and so on. Okay, so now let's jump ahead to E. So we have oboe over clarinet. That's very, very cool, very elegant, and not closer spacing. It's very, very cool. And then flutes, both flutes, completely isolated, right? With just a touch of clarinet. I feel that's absolutely spot on, beautiful, works great. And it'll have a beautifully vivid sound here. And then, the same thing with the violin coming in. And I think here you could push. Once again, push. Ta-da-da-ta-da-dum. And then like you have the same exact formula as before, and then oboe leading upwards, flute, and so on, and then answered by a little wind chorale here. So here the exception, I feel, proves the rule, right? There has to be, like, if you're going to stay in the same octave positions with these, with this same little chord progression, then it has to be so different as to, like the contrast has to be absolutely completely different in color if you're not going to have a change of register, right? And that's what you do here. And and then this works all just really great horn scoring in here. And then little conversation back and forth. Right? And then we have the little da 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 bum bum. And that's all really nice. I love the scurrying down here. And that, the way that you just sort of break things up instead of allowing it to be so busy. Yeah, it's so much easier for the cellist to play. Yeah, and then and so this is all great with it. It just is really great scoring. I think you need a destination dynamic here at the end of these, and also you're missing. This should be forte in all parts, diminuendo down to piano, right at the end of same for everybody, diminuendo in all parts. And this should, since this ends with a rest, have a piano at the end here too. So anything that ends with a rest on the next bar, have a destination dynamic before the end of the bar of piano. Yeah, and then this is great here. Beep, beep, beep. Yeah, and just it's a lot less work for the players the way that you scored it. Yeah, and then here you've got this big quadruple stop. Yeah. Bum 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 bum. Maybe this could just be a triple stop of stacked sixths. I don't think you really need the F at the bottom there, right? Because who else is playing that F? The horns, right? So nobody's going to hear that bottom note there, right? I would say a stack of sixths would be so much easier, and then like not having to worry about the bottom note for the players would be the way to go, I think. Yeah, so yeah, and that's a really good repeat, the way that it's scored. Yeah, and this yeah, yeah. So very, very cool. I would say like forte piano, like I think that you could just end and put the piano sign here, right? Because they can't really, I mean, like maybe they could damp the head or something, right? But I mean, that's not very period, right? So I would say just like everybody go to fortissimo and then piano. This way that you've scored it here. I think that works really great for the timpani. Right. And this is what I would say is a more modern approach than a classical one, or classical period, early romantic. Right. So those are my comments on this wonderful first movement. So you did a great job on this, Gabi, and so let's stop now, and I'm going to run the just a screen for about a minute with my evaluation, my enhanced evaluation notes for you to use or copy or take a screenshot of or whatever. Anybody who wants to read them and review them. And then we're going to go to, I've been talking for quite a while here. Let's take an intermission. And, I'll pass along a little orchestration tip. And then we'll come back with the second movement, also a fantastic orchestration, of Beethoven's 24th Piano Sonata, as orchestrated by Gabi. Wind or brass instruments may take the place of cellos in securing an octave with double basses when scored sensitively with an ear for color. Such combinations may even appear to be imperceptibly unified in timbre while underpinning delicate textures. I've mentioned in other tips and score analysis commentary how double basses need not always be doubled at the octave by cellos. Other instruments can take on the role, freeing up the cellos for other functions like playing patterns, figuration, higher harmonic and linear support, and of course the intensely sonorous melodic roles of which they're uniquely capable. I've addressed the quite effective use of violas in octaves with basses in my book 100 Orchestration Tips, Chapter 88, Viola as Bass. Now let's look at some other combinations to add to your toolkit. While there are many examples of this in the late Romantic and post-Romantic eras, what springs to my mind most vividly is the delicate scoring of Debussy in assigning low horn and bassoon as octave partners to his double basses in La Mer. A beautiful yet simple example of this occurs in La Mer's second movement, at the fifth bar after Rehearsal 38. Violas and cellos set up a circling pattern of descending measured tremolo eighth notes, fiercely at first, then gradually losing energy. Above, secco pizzicato violins pluck offhand fragments of the viola's line. Underpinning this little hypnotic dance, double basses sit on their lowest A flat, alternating down to F and back. Doubling them at the octave, unison bassoons take advantage of the bass's overtone to sound smoother and more integrated in timbre. As the basses fade away, Debussy peels off the second bassoonist, leaving the slightly thinner and more individual voice of the first. This fits perfectly under the ever-lightening cellos, which lose their octave companionship from the violas above. Our attention, of course, is supposed to be on the cellos fading away, not the low tones below. But it's precisely the superb subtlety of color and restraint which makes that possible for the average listener. I'll be back to share the second half of this tip tomorrow during the intermission to Klaus Ferretti's evaluation. Or if you're a Patreon supporter, you can go view the whole preview tip now over in the exclusive feed. Now, let's return to Gabi's excellent orchestration and see what she did with the second movement of Beethoven's 24th Piano Sonata. A worthy successor to your Movement 1 orchestration, Gabi. So I like this one just about as much as the first one. And this evaluation may go a little faster than the previous one. Of course, it's a shorter movement, and there are less bars, and there's a lot of reused material, not necessarily in your orchestration, but by Beethoven himself. So things should go pretty quickly. However, there are still a few little things to work out, so we'll kind of go through a few different things. But before we do that, I wanted to point out a few really awesome things that you are doing here. Like, once again, you're using kind of sparse timpani pitches, and I'll have a few suggestions down the road about maybe a way of increasing the availability and bringing a little bit more emphasis into certain areas of your work, certain parts of your orchestration. Then here, when we get to, like, in terms of your natural horns, you use a lot of open pitches. In fact, I don't think there are any stop pitches. Once again, I mean, there's the B here, but yeah, but that's a real typical period kind of adjustment. Yeah, and then just really, just pretty restricted use of the horn. There could have been maybe, like, if you had wanted more power in the low end for brass, you could have easily added a trio of trombones. I think I did that with my orchestration. But I think that it works the way that it is. You use your bassoons a lot for kind of low end power and richness and so on, sonorities, and I think that works fine. It doesn't. I don't think you really need trombones or anything. But if you had felt the need for more power, that's what I would have recommended. And there are a few little things to work out and so on. So let's get straight into that. Starting off with our enhanced evaluation, and this is just, once again, to go through all of those little bits and pieces and parts and so on and sections to try to get it more ready for to be performed, possibly, or rehearsed or read or whatever. Which I feel, just like the first movement, this would be a worthy ingredient to somebody's program if they chose to perform it. So let's get back to this tempo, and I really apologize if you feel that I'm going over this too much, and I don't mean like if it's getting a bit get a bit too much, I apologize. But here we have a marking of allegro vivace, right? Now how that sort of proves the point that Moscheles' interpretation of allegro monontroppo is 100 and is 138 or whatever. So how can monontroppo be faster than vivace, right? It just doesn't make sense to me. So I feel that if you take my advice, if you normalize the tempo in the first movement, then this makes sense all of a sudden. Vivace, right? At 132. I wouldn't go any faster with the way that you have scored certain things in this movement. I think that 132 is plenty fast. So if you bring if the first movement down to 120, 126, then I feel that this movement the second movement immediately becomes much more exciting by contrast, right? And it's also, there can be more beauty and eloquence and lyricism in the first movement, and then just more of that, that real intense, exciting kind of playing to just sort of finish everything off. And I feel that that's also a really good use of the energy of the orchestra, right? They've got more of a sonata allegro in the first part to sort of work out their chops and to play some lyrical lines and some rhythmic parts and so on. And then here they can just go nuts, right? So that's another thing, is the balance between the two tempos, I think, is pretty important. Now let's get back to that timpani roll. So here, timpani in F and C. And I'm just wondering, if there's any chance for a more expanded role for timpani. All right, so maybe getting past the need to have, the need to be period. Maybe if you added at least one more kettle, then you get the C, right? And you can really like land on the C if you need it. And that really helps like when you go to the 5, right? And then also like if you also have D, right, which makes a whole lot of sense, right? If you have like F, G, C, D, then you can really sock it to the to the downbeat here and here, right? And you can really get that big thump. So it's just a thought to have a couple more kettles, and this would be my suggestion. Going past the strict period interpretation and thinking of this orchestration as an expression of what you can do, right? And what you would like to get performed of your own ingenuity. Right? So, yeah, there's something similar with horns. I had mentioned before, like you could have had, a trio of trombones or a pair of trombones even, or you could have maybe a couple of C basso horns, right? And then you can get those lower pitches, and you have a much more of a variety of pitches in the 5, right, around that area. It's much easier to get a 5 of 5 down lower, and yeah, so there are. And also just wondering if you would be willing to score the occasional stopped pitch, right? And maybe more intervals, because you've got a lot of, maybe there are more opportunities for octaves, fifths, fourths, and so on, as opposed to a duet unison pitches. Just there are a lot of a duet unison pitches around this piece. So, I just wondering, you could have with another pair of horns, or, I don't think you'll have any problem getting 4 horns together for a performance. And, if you score like period style as if they were C basso, then most professional players can read that and transpose it to F, or you can just give them a part in F. Right? Okay. Now, we've got a bit of a problem here, okay? So, you've got a cacciatoras written out as and they sound like appoggiaturas in the mock-up, right? So I think that you meant an appoggiatura, right? So that the timing really is da 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 rather than da 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 da, which is the way when you have the little grace note with the slash, it should be crushing, right? Crushed, right? Into the of course it happens like right before or right on the beat, but it isn't necessarily robbing the following note of its value, right? That's the appoggiatura, right? So that would have to be written out without the slash. But I think that I can see what you're doing here. That it's a sort of a very clever way of avoiding the whole problem of counting and of timing and everything else that is inherent. But the problem is that it doesn't go away just because we've notated it differently. A lot of these places where you're trading off, where I say, look, in my pitfalls, I said, try not to do that more than like 2 or 3 bars, right? So this is fine. That's all right, but then we have situations where it just really goes on between instruments for a long time in these things, rather than like I don't know if you recall some of my recommendation, but if you could have worked the downbeat into the part that has the alternating, right, so that they double on that pitch, so they can go dun da da dun da da dun da da dun da, and that really keeps them just absolutely dead precise on, just right on the money, right? as opposed to restetta, 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 restetta. That can actually, like the rest and like not playing can start to throw the player off, so that these players start to get farther and farther apart, right? And to make matters worse, the conductor may be conducting ahead of the beat slightly, right? Especially in a piece that's as helter-skelter as this one. So if they're conducting the beat ahead slightly, then it's harder and harder for them to correct what's going on. That's why I was suggesting that the offbeat players, with these long, long stretches, that the offbeat players have just a touch of the downbeat, right? So they might be doubling the alternating player on that first pitch. What I already said this just a second ago, but yeah, but just like so that's something that I think that it's a pain in the butt for you to go through this whole thing and to correct everything back to 16th notes from these grace notes. But Beethoven did not score this as grace notes, right? He didn't score it as appoggiaturas. He really, really wanted the sense of like da 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 da. He really wanted the precision, right? So he wanted it written out, and I think that we should respect that, right? So that's like number one. Number two is that the appoggiaturas are not going to help. If you were thinking that would solve the problem of the timing, it's not going to make any difference, because in the end, the timing is the same in terms, like the perception may be slightly different in terms of like identifying the note and where it is in the beat and so on and so forth. But the result is the same in terms of the articulation and the placement of the notes, right? So I am not going to say anything further than that, except that just all of these connecting passage things need to be rewritten, is the way that I would put it. But I think that the rewriting would be very, very simple and very quick. And throwing in the D flat right here, or the C. If you gave your piccolo player the C here, just as a little 16th note, have them go C da da, or C da da, B flat da da, and so on, right? Then just to really keep them together, right? You just really want them to be intertwined rather than completely separated all the time. Like once again, in my pitfalls video, I said like try not to have them completely bereft of each other's, stepping on each other's toes for more than like 2 or 3 bars, maybe 4 at the most, right? But even at that, I would try to find ways to integrate them a little bit more. You'll still get the individuality for the most part, right? Just a teeny bit of unison on the downbeat is not going to hurt the tone of the other instrument. And it's no problem for the players who have got the on-beat. Like they've got the tact from the baton of the conductor, so they can just be going ta-da, 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 ta-da. But the alternated player really has to go ta ta-da, ta ta-da, ta ta-da, ta ta-da, ta ta-da, 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 especially if the conductor decides to speed things up, right? They're speeding up, and their baton is ahead of the beat. So how do these players figure out where they are if they start to get slightly lost or slightly off, right? The danger is that they're just going to get more, they're going to start pulling the beat forward slightly or backward slightly, right? I'm not saying that would always happen. I'm not saying that it would be more likely to happen than not, but I think that the more complicated and more demanding that you make this particular technical and counting problem, the fewer orchestras can play this work, right? That's the other thing. So if you can make it easier on them, then you'll get maybe you can get down to the community, regional, semi-pro orchestra level and get this played a few times rather than just once in a reading by a pro orchestra, had a little extra time at the end of a rehearsal, or was doing like an open reading call and they liked this and they wanted to rip through it, right? So anyways, so I would just say, there's nothing wrong at all with the scoring though, right? All of this is very ingeniously done, and I will talk about it when we go section by section. All right, I'm very impressed. Okay, now let's go on to the next little thingy. Yeah, just a bit of proofing for divisi and unison in the strings as with before. Um, yeah. So those are my general comments. They don't need to be there don't need to be too many more than that. I'm just once again it's a shorter movement and you did a great job with it. So let's take a look at a few bars of extended evaluation. A few minor points here, like we were talking about adue and like whether to split stems and so on. I think you can go adue right here, right? And I think that breaking the beam here is fine for your eighth notes. That's player number one, and then both players can start adue at the next flagged eighth note, right? Let's see, 47. These are really wide pages. So, so right in here, Beethoven has this, and you might have noticed some pianists like drop down a little bit, sort of almost a subito piano on beat one and so that they have somewhere to go, right? And the reason why I am recommending it possibly is just something to think about. Like none of these recommendations are rules or you must do this or you must do that necessarily. But just maybe best practices or maybe some a possible alternate to how you scored it. What concerns me a little bit here is the fact that you've got these sort of ostinato octaves here in your horns, just going bob 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 and double basses. And I'm just concerned that without some kind of variation here, that the repetition is going to sort of start to dominate the everything that's going on. So maybe if you just suddenly drop down subito piano here and then crescendo forward again, right? Then you're sort of freshening up the texture and the energy and so on. All right. Then there was So here, you slurring forwards, right? Like okay, you're going pow, right? And here you're going da whoop. Right, why not just go da pow? And like so maybe ditch the slurs. I think that like there's I almost feel like you don't need a slur here. What you need and you don't even need a staccato. What you need is an accent. Bam. Right? This is a lot of leg pulling by Beethoven, right? It's like he's goofing around and being silly and showing that he can crack jokes and he's one step ahead of the listener, right? Like most listeners of his era would have just been completely lost, right? You're gonna need it's really obvious that this is the second player. You might want to add that in the next bar. Here, that's the first player. That's the second player. You need to put the rests over the top, right? And these stems need to point downwards. That would be the rule, I would say. Yeah, yeah. See, this is where that two should go, right? But here, you don't need to mark a number. Just put in the missing rests in the first voice, right? And then it's really obvious what's going on. And then we just clarify that this is the second player going forward from this bar. Right? I have to say this just really feels messy. This slurring. I wonder if the slurs could be over, but maybe that's messy too. Yeah. Anyways, but that's I talk to people who specialize in engraving. All right, so So now, talking about slurs, I feel that all of these areas of pentuplets, they should be separately slurred, right? So each beam group should have a slur. Because you're asking them to go die, die under one bow. So die, die. So like you have to understand that they're like each time they're repositioning, and with the repositioning back and forth, it's just easier to change the bow direction, right? To just that it makes a lot more sense, and you end up with less artifacts of fingers sliding or dropping the note or whatever, right? So just a hint from that kind of stuff. If you have this sort of very very vigorous kind of arpeggiated scoring, it's better to have the one specific direction be under a slur, right? And then when it drops and goes to another one, just have another slur. And there's a like when the second iteration of that idea, right? Same thing. I would say, even though this like works its way down, I would still go slur, slur, right? And same thing with these other parts, winds as well. Well, actually, the winds doesn't really matter because they can cover everything under one breath. So that's not necessarily needed, but definitely with the strings. All right, let's jump back. All right, so here's another example of just putting in the second voice rest, and you don't even have to mark the number one, right? Just put in your second voice rest. Here. Yeah, because this is just that's not a thing, the way that this is scored. But you're probably looking at that and saying, "Oh boy, I should have, I should have proofed that." That's all right. Okay, so this is I can see what you're doing here. You are scoring this tied so that there won't be an added stress here at the downbeat, right? And the same thing here. Like you don't want there to be a stress here on this, so you're tying them together. I would say that it's probably not all that important. With this style, this kind of period style, that wasn't, if the conductor wanted there to be a stress, then they just mark the fortissimo again, right? So I think if you just leave out the ties, it's pretty obvious what you want, and this doesn't need to be tied, is what I'm saying. I would say like when you have situations where like there's a specific organizational kind of issue, like for instance, there are a bunch of bars to count, and the timpanist really wants to kind of hold everything together, or maybe the string player playing tremolo below or something. That's one thing. Or if there's like a series of different pitches that are grouped in certain ways, let's say it was going back and forth between the C and the F, and maybe there was a G and so on, and it was just kind of then that would be a good way of organizing it. That would help visually for the player, right? But there really isn't much of a need for that here. That's all I'm saying. So you probably don't need to do that. So this is a finer point now. Beethoven scores this, da 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 da, and here he goes to octaves, right? In the score, or not octaves, but like just a much more simple kind of a thing. But the problem is that like the way that you have scored this, you're just suddenly adding all this intensity here with the first clarinet and flute and oboe, a duet oboes and so on, all kind of together. So there's this intense thin sound all together, and then there's this bum ba da dum. I'm wondering if there's a way of like keeping the vibe of this going into the bar, and then ba da da da, like from here strip it down and make it more intense more. Do you see what I'm saying? Or alternately, don't make this quite so pointy in its timbre, right? So, either kind of extend this scoring a little bit going into here, even though it's a little incorrect. I just feel that the proportions are better. Or maybe don't make this quite so hot on top. You know what I mean? You've got a quadruple unison here. And then here you actually go to fewer players, right? So maybe there's a way of fixing this a little bit. It just feels so sudden, like there's like a, and if you like that sound, then great, then just leave it in. But yeah, this is one of those proportions that felt a little, like almost like a jump scare or something. You know what I mean? And like just a real sudden change of timbre, that was just felt a little unnatural. Okay, and then maybe here, like we have ritardando, maybe molto allargando. Do you know what I mean? Just like really, right? Then I think you get the push and you get the, and here I'm not really sure whether this was meant to be unmeasured tremolo or like if you're going really slow, you're just thinking yeah da 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 da, right? So this might need a little bit more work. You're probably already thinking about ways that you could possibly improve it and so on. So, yeah, just so if you think of the need for more work, maybe even a timpani roll as well, right? Yeah, because it just really feels a little nude without the timpani. And then just as I mentioned in the first movement, the way that there's like there's staccatos just didn't feel like they had enough oomph. You know what I mean? I just feel that this ends so abruptly that it I mean like if it were like a quarter note with a staccato or a quarter note with a marcato or something like that, it just feels like it doesn't dun, 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 dun. Do you see what I'm saying? It doesn't really come to an end. It just suddenly gets cut off, almost like somebody, were like cut the tape, right? As opposed to da 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 da. You see what I'm saying? It's just like it can end quickly, but to end so sparsely. You know what I mean? It's just like feels like it's stripped down to the bone. There's no juice in it, right? It's just boom, that's it. But it's like it doesn't have the kind of power in the scoring that will make the hall resound, right? And it also doesn't have the kind of oomph to it that will make the audience want to applaud as much, right? I mean, it's like that's not the whole point, but there's a certain maybe we could call it cynical, maybe we could call it inevitable. There's a certain aspect to this where you really want to like wind the audience up and then give them a big slap on the back right at the end, right? So like this just feels a little too abrupt. That doesn't mean that these previous staccatos need to not be staccatos, but I just feel like the last note needs to have more power and a little bit more duration. It can still cut off quickly, but it's just very, very light and bright and short, right? It just doesn't feel like it ends the piece very, very much. Right? Okay, so those are my general comments. So let's go back to the beginning. And now, if I can just get my screens to cooperate with one another. Let's see. Okay, excellent. So we are going to go over this opening section, kind of our main theme. And then we're going to go back and look at how, different parts were orchestrated and so on, right? That recapitulate, right, or that come back in different ways. All right. So, so my first concern here was, do the shifts of dynamics and registers imply contrast or texture? I mean, I think with an orchestra, it's unavoidable. Even if you were to stick with the same exact instruments, right? Like even if we're to all be strings, the jumps of, and it was a direct transcription, the jumps of register in the strings would create contrast or texture. But, but like, to what degree does that evoke Beethoven, right? So I feel that you've really gone for the personal style, and there are a lot of really lovely combinations here. Double reeds, of course, going over to strings, and then middle winds, right? Going opposite directions is a beautiful combination, answered by strings. And then flutes over bassoon. That's also a beautiful combination, answered by strings again. There's a this is one, there's some arrangements that this bit of advice I feel doesn't really have much relevance for, but I think in this one it's something worth considering, and that is whether you want a teeny bit of meno here, right? Da da da, ba ba da da da, da da da, ba 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 ba. Da, 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 da. You see what I'm saying? Like a lot of pianists just do just a poco meno, right? Just a teeny bit, like they're thinking about it. Da, 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 ba, ba, da, 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 and they just launch right back into it. And that little flex there, I feel like it's almost like a tiny moment of relaxation that makes the speed that follows just feel all the faster, right? So I think about it. It's just something to consider. Right. And so is that the next question is this smooth and not awkward? And the awkwardness that I was worried about was that the die kind of slurring, right? Which on piano is one thing, and actually, to be completely frank about it, most pianists play it without flicking off the second note of each pair of sixteenths, right? That is very, very difficult to absolutely nail, and there are very few pianists actually do it. They just basically they play it more just more integrated, right? But I was concerned that people would take that scoring literally. Now, of course, the way that you've interpreted it, you've got these sixteenths and everything, and they're very nicely scored. And I really like the motion in here, the bassoons and cellos working together. Also with a bit of voice crossing here with the violas, and there's just such wonderful little bits and pieces in here. It's just a lot of it is just very spot on in terms of energy and color and everything else. I just love the way that this reaches up. Oboe plus flute. This is a really nice example of that. Both in very balanced registers with the clarinet below. It's just great. But just imagine if you had the timpani, right? If you had you had your G kettle in there, and you could go bump bump C, right? Yeah, and does it end with finality? Finale. Does it end with finality? And I think that it pretty much does. Here's another example of, it's almost like the staccato might be a little too abrupt as well, right? Dun, 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 dun. I almost wonder like if this were like a marcato or like a or an accent or something like that. But I understand that staccato is to leave a little bit of breathing space here, right? So the next question is whether or not you would want to throw in a slight pausa here, right? It's just a tiny breath there to let the hull clear a little bit, right? And and just to kind of recoup, right, for the player. They can catch a slight breath if they need to right here, because look at how long you have them playing, and then suddenly they have to do this little solo part, right? Okay, so I think this first little sally here into these connecting passages is very, very nicely done, right? So this all scored out in sixteenths is actually really nice. I think that this is something where you should continue to dovetail, right? So dovetail to the D sharp here. even though they're both like flute family instruments. It's still like that little bonding note is really important. I don't think that you like if you write everything out in sixteenths, all you need is the first 16th. Right? You don't need the da da, just da. So da da da. Da 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 da, and so on, just trading off on the 16ths, not going ba da, because the da da is like it makes things too fat, right? Okay, and then this pluck 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 pluck. That's so cool. Pluck 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 pluck. Okay. Yeah, so this is all fine. Yeah. All right, so that is like so that's the opening of this piece, right? So now let's go back and take a look at how you let's sort of remind ourselves like how did you score this, right? The double A section. Because now we're going to compare all of these like first part of the main theme. Okay, and you know shifts. Do the shifts of shifts of dynamics and registers imply contrast of texture? Is there a natural variation of scoring approaches reflecting the overall progression of drama and scope? Right, that's our next concern. So, you know, we had double reed strings, middle winds, strings, flute and bassoon, strings. Right. Okay, so what's next? We have flute and oboes. Actually, sorry, I jumped ahead. I was looking at the rehearsal mark and not at the score. So oboes and bassoons. So it's like similar as before, right? And then here, I love this, strings plus flutes and oboes, answered by lower winds. It's beautiful. It's very Brahmsian, right? To team up clarinets and winds in a chorale like this, right? Of course, like he would usually do it a bit slower and more, you know, more somber. And then, you know, and then flute and oboe, ya da da, bum 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 bum, coming back to clarinet and bassoon. And I feel that that's a really great entree back into this, you know, into this kind of more developed idea of the, you know, of that second half of the main theme. All right, let's jump ahead to double E. Okay, so now, oopsies. Now we've got our main theme again. Flutes, kind of up high there a little bit, and oboe, clarinet, and see, like this is nice because like the way that you have broken this up into, you know, like, you know, the change of direction, the changes of voicing and so on and so forth. That really kind of it foolproofs your score against sounding organ-like, right? There was the concern with the stacked brass and so on. So yeah, so you really avoid that here. And then there's this little touch of emphasis in the second violins. Okay, so I mean, all right, everybody wants to give the second violin something to do. If you're going to be working, you know, if you're going to be passing the score around and you know possibly more community orchestra oriented or semi-pro or whatever, I would definitely flip this scoring around. Have these parts right in here. Just have your second violin stick with it, and then have your first violins come in here and lead the section, right? So I think that's just much safer, and you'll get a better result. Nothing against second violinists. I've been one. All right. But yeah. So yeah. So we have that combination, sort of little wind chorale with help right here, and then once again, you know, we've got the bassoons, bum bum ba bum bum, with the lower strings, bum bum ba bum bum. Right, and then kind of the same grouping as before, but with more strings, octaves in the first and seconds, with the contrary motion in the viola. I think that that's also a really effective combination as well. Then going forward, bum, bum. And this is really lovely right in here. This little harmony here in your middle strings, I should say, viola and cello, over the bassoon, first bassoon, works beautifully. And then piccolo and flutes with pizzicato below, right? And like this is always a very, like you always set it up so logically. Like the whole point of it is like how are you going to be entering into this second part of the theme, of the main theme, right? Which, you know, oboe over clarinets with a little help from the cellos in the bottom, right? So that's just beautiful, and the way that this is all set up, right? So we'll be looking at this part, comparing these parts in a bit. All right, so last iteration. All right. So once again, we've got combined, just very, very simple combined strings, sort of strings on the outside. I love that idea. First violin on top, cello on the bottom, and then all the winds in the middle, right? And it's really nice. You get a lot of firmness to the sound. It's got a beautiful resonant kind of a curve to it. And then just answered by lower strings. Dun, 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 dun. So it is definitely a contrast. And then kind of the same idea again, but without the strings. Bum, bum, bum. And this time lower, the lower strings and bassoons together. Dun, 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 dun. Oboes under strings or under violins in octaves. That is just a really lovely idea once again. Da, 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 and then lower winds leading forward. Bum, bum, ba-dum, bum, bum, dun, 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 dun. So we'll talk about this coda when we get there, all right? All right, so now we already talked about, some of the concerns here, like to, to avoid awkwardness, which is not really a part of this, ending with finality. Okay, but there was another thing, maintaining nervous energy throughout, right? And I felt that was really powerful. And then, like as I was saying before, might be interesting to just draw back the energy again and then push again, right? Just like I was mentioning here, like because of these, the way that this just bounces along, it might just all the repeated notes might start taking over, right? But you could even play with that possible idea here if it's useful, right? Because but like, it's just, I mean, how much do you want to fool around with it? You don't really need to. Yeah, starting from around here, I think, if you were going to do that. The thing is that like it's not really all that necessary here because of the way that you're adding on the color, right, with the winds. So you've got enough of a contrast between this second part and the first part, right? But all the same, yeah. So comparing it here, that would be, I would say the less that you messed around with the first part, the more messing around with this dynamically a little might help, right? Just because of that at the beginning, just having like the constant intensity, right? Might just make this feel a little bit too much, or just piling on a little much. But the structure is very cool. Like the way you lead into it, clarinet and bassoons, right, and the pizzicato below, and then once again strings come in. We've got this lovely little part right in here of violas doubling second clarinet and so on, and then right in here coming in and sort of doing a part in octaves with the cellos, and it's just a really great idea. And these winds getting freed up. I like the fact that it's just like you're just using first players. You're not going nuts on the a due playing, right? Yeah. Yeah, I just feel it's simple and elegant and powerful, and it pushes towards here, boom, right? And just like just like before, if there's some way of ending these, ending these chords not too understated, you know what I mean? Like the staccato is great, but there's some kind of emphasis, right? Just to really, you know, I feel that also like if the staccato feels sort of weak, then I feel like the section kind of doesn't feel like it's ended appropriately. There's like the proportions may not be exactly where you want them. Okay, well let's jump forward to bar 100. Right, and then here we have this, da 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 ba bum ba dum bum, and and all of these things, consider the meno a tempo thing, right? So clarinets with a little cello on the bottom. And it's the organization here is pretty simple. I don't know if you need a duet oboes, especially going down to this B flat here, right? This is one area where like I feel yeah, it's piano slurring down to B flat. Like once again, this is like limiting the amount of players who can do this, right? So semi-pro community orchestra. I mean, they can play it, but it might sound a bit squawky, right? Or it's not the and it I don't feel this is something that, well, of course Beethoven couldn't get the low B flat, right? So if you're thinking period, then that's a hitch right there immediately, right? But since this area is just so easily covered by clarinet, I just there might need to be some kind of rethink here to make it very beautifully balanced. Maybe like the first oboe could just end on D, and then that could dovetail into a duet clarinets, right? Playing this, da da da, and then a duet oboes could come in here. I don't know, but just this bothers me. Yeah, but like a lot of similar organizational kinds of things. But I like the way that you're sort of keeping the pitches down. You're not letting it kind of explode upwards, right? Or stack. You're not stacking things on too intensely. Here, this sort of adue wind approach, it's going to be fine. I don't think there's any need for you at all to slur forwards like this. I think just like do what the oboes are doing, right? Ta ta, point point point. So just same thing here. Just have them match in terms of their articulation. And once again, bam, pausa, right? Bam, da 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 da, right? Might not hurt. Just in terms of letting your oboist like catch their like exhale and then breathe in again, because they're going to have a lot of stored up breath that's going to start to get stale by right here. So putting in a pausa helps breathe, and then then these other players can do what they need to do. All right, so let's talk about these little connecting passages, to use the appropriate functional word. Okay. So I already talked about this. I just like really admired what you did here. Kind of just going from player to player. Bassoon to clarinet to oboe to flute to piccolo. It was very, very cute. And then working your way back, pizzicato, don't dee don't dee do dee do do, and so on. There's no reason why your first oboist couldn't play that C, right? If there was any concern, like if you were throwing that in just to kind of give them a break, they don't need it, right? But if you just were throwing this in for that little touch of color, that's great. But still have your flute player go play the F sharp in unison. So dun da da, And you won't really hear the flute that much because they're in a weaker register, but it will give them the downbeat that they need to get this right. So da 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 da. And once again, write everything out in sixteenths, please. Yeah. Yeah, and then just a couple of bars of playing offbeats in here, right? Then that is okay. And this leads forwards really nicely to your double reeds again. Yeah, with that little pizzicato pops right in here and a touch of timpani. It's all really, really great. Okay, so now let's look at the one where the little connecting passage where you go downhill. Now here, there isn't really the need for a pausa in terms of breath, but if you establish the pausa as an element of the music that just happens, then the conductor is going to want to put it everywhere, right? And the players will be expecting it. So, yeah, and then you're just kind of heading downwards, and and look, you are at forte, right? So like as you go downwards, like this will start to match less and less, right? There'll be like a hootier kind of a sound from your clarinet, which by the way, shouldn't you mark this as forte? Right? Okay, we had the first on forte before. Okay, so that's not so bad. Yeah, so the clarinet will get hootier and the oboe will get honkier, right? But all the same, I would still have the oboist, going. They're going to be going ta 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 ta. I would have them go ta 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 right here. Okay. And then the clarinetist could easily hit this sounding middle C ta 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 ta. And then just maybe these last two bars, don't worry about giving people the downbeat. Just a couple of bars, right? So long once they're locked in place and there's, they got the motoristic energy going, then great. But to be perfectly honest, this could all be played by one bassoonist too, right? Anyway, but I would go for the dovetailing and interlocking kind of thing myself, rather than having them be totally separated like this. Because it just because you want the absolute precision, just going right back into this, right? You just want it to be absolutely dead on. You don't want any kind of hitch in the regularity. All right, and we'll talk about this, this kind of episode. Beethoven's having an episode. All right. Now this is another one of those things where you go upwards. So so once again, it's winds and so on. So just to keep in mind, we've got like pretty much all of your episodes have all been in winds, right? And you don't like add strings until later. So it's just like a thought, and then here you go to pizzicato and so on. So you have to just judge for yourself whether you should always do that, right? Like always have the same exact approach, or have some kind of variation, or have some kind of conversation between the players, right? The conversation means that you're going to have to score to the strengths of the registers better, right? Or not better. You haven't done it at all. So, but you'd have to score to the strengths of the registers between the strings and the winds, right? So that the conversation is on an equal footing. So yeah, bum da da bum da da, right? And then same thing with the oboe, dun da da dun da da dun da da dun da da. Then when flute comes in, dun da da dun da da, and piccolo dun da da dun da da. So no piccolo could easily hit this C, right? And then this B flat and C and B flat and so on, and just to really really keep them on the money. Right. Yeah. And you can even have the first flutist dovetail from this E flat right here. Yeah, but I really love the change in color and then dropping the pizzicato. That's a really nice idea. And then, going back to the flutes and, just kind of being absurd, right? Leading forward to this. And it's nice just to give the piccolo a break right in here. Okay. And then kind of leading downwards, very similar to what happened before. No problems there. And then this is, yeah. So, all right, so here, here we get into like interlocking oboes and violin. So, yeah, so at fortissimo, getting that low B, it may honk with a. I mean, it might honk under any circumstances, just because of reeds can sometimes be better for lower notes, louder dynamics or softer dynamics or whatever, right? So, this will be very coarse, right? It just, maybe you might want to do clarinet up to here and then oboe come in later, right, or something like that. Having like your, adding like a little pacing note there, just like dun da da dun da da dun da da dun da, would be no problem at all, because that will get absorbed into the woodwind partner, right? And that it'll still feel like wind string, wind string, wind string, but at least you'll have perfect pacing in your first violins, like all the way through to here. Yeah, and then you just kind of have this sort of back and forth, and yeah, once again, give piccolo that little downbeat or onbeat note to pace with. Now here, this is a little trickier, right? Because it's such a low note. This is like out of the range of the piccolo. But like just a couple of bars, it's fine, right? But then, like right in here, I would definitely just if you can, yeah, it just really does go on quite a bit. Yeah, and then swap these around so that you're no, this was I was thinking of the other part. So this is all fine. Bum bum bum. Yeah. So it just needs a little bit of work right in there, but it's all going to work out, I think. Okay. Wow. That's such a long expanse of notes. All right. And so now let's look at the episodes. All right. Okay, so I already mentioned it would be great, like if you had four kettles and you had a G and a D, you could go boom, boom. You could really give it a lot more oomph, right? If you had trombones, they could be going boom, right? I think if you have C basso horns, you could play the D as well, right? Without not being so high. Okay, so let's not worry about that though. Let's just look at the orchestration of what you did here. Bassoon in octave with double basses. Hey, I wonder where that idea might have shown up somewhere else in this video. Right, so you're doing exactly what I mentioned before, except like loudly. Second bassoon over double bass, right, making a nice firm octave, and here it works. It works great in at fortissimo as much as it does at pianissimo or piano. The thing about it is, of course, that the sonority of the wind instrument on top is going to be much more resonant, right, than the double basses below. So you just have to, you have to be willing to accept that. Right? All right. So this scoring here, these quintuplets, it's it's sort of borderline for like a like a kind of a mid-level orchestra. I would say it's pretty. I'm not saying to underwrite it or anything like that, but like if you could add like an ossia maybe in 16th notes or something like that for that would might be a really good approach. If they just went da 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 da, right? As just like little osias offered, and put them in the full score so the conductor can see them. And then I think that will make this a lot more accessible to more orchestras. Yeah, and this is very, very cool. Bum, 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 bum. Yeah, and then this little sort of bantering, right? Worrying doubts is what I've written here. So, do you have consistency of strength rising through the instrumental registers? Is my concern, and I think that you do. You sort of cheat a little by just adding, like, once you get to the F sharp here, you just suddenly add 2 octaves above, right? Which is kind of a real way of like underlining the idea of the F sharp and everything else. Like, there's going to be no problem hearing the oboe and the clarinets together, but like by adding this sheen on top, right, and then hitting that high A in both, piccolo and a due flutes, it's going to just really, it's going to have that big whistle. And of course, when you're hitting these F sharps in your violins, it's just such a really cool idea, right? It's just such a nice way of it's like a steam whistle, right? Yeah, so I feel that this all works really, really well. And then then just pretty much exactly the same thing again, and then going into the worrying downs. Right? So this is a lot of this is really, really similar to the second half of the main theme, right? So we have similar problems, textural and dynamic expansion, and then here, like, you drop down again. So it's like, so Beethoven is already sort of like, has set a little bit the idea for some pianists that this at the middle of that second iteration of the second half of the main theme, of like kind of pulling back and then going crescendo again, because he's like, he already does it. So if he does it here, I guess pianists think, well, okay, maybe I should put it in there, right? So I think you could easily do it without hurting anything. Yeah, and just this real scramble upwards, I think, is really nicely orchestrated. Yeah, and you keeping the bass simple, right, and varied. Right, that's a really great idea. Yeah, and good clarinet scoring right in there. Right, and then just really, really getting intense right in here with your winds. Yeah, this is really going to shriek in the piccolo, but it's going to be worth it. Right. And then look how Beethoven has actually scored a pausa right into it, right? He just decides to start on beat 2 and, right? So this is one of those things where I felt, because of the way that Beethoven scored this, it gave me permission to put in pausas before connecting passages with my own scoring, right? So wow, wouldn't it be great, like, if they had tunable kettles back in Beethoven's period, that were just very easy and quick to retune on the fly, just like using hand cranks or pedals or whatever. But there's nothing stopping you from retuning the G to a G flat, or just scoring a G, which of course your timpanist will just tune down to a G flat. What you could do is you could put in the G, and then you could put like parentheses G. You could put in the flat as a parentheses, right? So if they just wanted to keep it period, they could just have the G, and then they could tune it down to a G flat for the because that's what the timpanist is going to do anyway. All right. So I felt that this was all really strong scoring. So let's compare it to 116. Yeah, and then of course, like, you bring in the timpani here because you've got your F. Yeah, and once again, double basses and bassoons and octaves. Wow, what a great idea! Where have we seen that? Right. Yeah. So, yeah, and then once again, Ossia is here in 16ths for your, for your semi-pure orchestra players. Right. Just something a little simpler. And I would say don't worry about that, like, like it being a sort of a jumble of noise. It already is a jumble of noise, right? And there's very similar approaches here, as they were before. And I think that it's good. It's solid. You should stick to it. Yeah, yeah. And then switching to oboes from clarinets, that all works great. Yeah, and then very similar. This part always reminds me a lot of Bach. Yeah, and just pretty much scored as before. Yeah. Right, and then then we've got our built-in pausa, right? Once again, and so on. So once again, I feel that this is all very strong. There's not a whole lot, but like wouldn't it be great if like you could get some of these, some action similar to what you had, what you have here in the previous. Not so much. It's nice that you sort of hold on all that power until right in here with timpani and horn, right? It's good to not overdo it, but if there were just touches of it previously, even if it were stop notes, that's like, I think that's what I'm trying to sort of say. If there were some way to bring in some stop notes, if you needed to get some of that same thing, or just a touch of timpani here and there, if you had a D, right, for instance. Okay, so now let's jump ahead. We've looked at everything in this movement except for the coda, right? So let's, yeah. Da da da. Ba ba da 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 da. Ba ba da 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 da. Ba da 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 da. Yeah, yeah, and like I don't know if you noticed, but like a lot of pianists play this. They don't overdo this. Like you remember, I'm a little stuck on this just because of the intensity of the color that suddenly arises here. Like a lot of them don't really push too much on the piano, right? And then once they hit this sforzando, yeah, then they start really pushing on all the other parts. Yeah. But I really love the conversation that you've got here between winds and strings and so on. The honest truth of this is that there's so much weight here at the beginning that the like just having first violins and so on is really not going to balance that much. You could easily have doubled this with just add your seconds, right? And then you'll get the same weight of tone that you've got in these by this this 4-voice unison right here. Right here you go to 3 voices, but it's still going to be intense. With combining flute, clarinet, and oboe all together, right? So maybe you need to double up on your violins here. Dun, 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 bum, 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 bum. And that's just beautiful. Yeah, and once again, I feel this needs a little bit more work. You probably are already thinking about what else you could do there, right? So I will not say. But my concerns here were: does this capture a certain pensive character? I believe you do. Like we can sort of hear Beethoven thinking, right? That's what you want here, and you don't want this to get too hot, and that's also true, right? So yeah, and then like is a direct transcription necessary? I question. Simplification appropriate? And I feel that that's kind of what you're going for here, but maybe there's a little bit more that can be done to express just like a little explosion of emotion before he just really drives home the point here. Right. And I have a little comment here, how to reference previous approaches as a culmination, not just repetition. And I feel that that's also something that you do here, like you're reusing a lot of the same motion and a lot of the same scoring. But but you're doing it. You're kind of bringing it together as this final point, and I feel that that's exactly what's needed here. And I love the way that we've got so much harmonic function here in the horns and the strings, and we've got we've got these octaves working here, or sorry, not octaves, but like we've got the similar motion here in your in your wind parts and so on. Yeah, yeah, that's just really lovely. And bum 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 bum, right? As opposed to bum dun dun dun. Yeah, so just a little bit of foot stomping here, I think. Okay, well, wow, what a journey! What an what this is epic. I've never done a an evaluation that was this long, so I really want to thank everybody who has stuck with this single orchestration. I think I've had like a couple of compilations that were like as close to 3 hours and so on. But yeah, just focusing on one score, one creator, one orchestrator. I think that it was, what's great about this is that it was so much worth looking at in detail and taking apart and putting back together again and so on. So I hope that was worth waiting for, Gabi. I'm so sorry once again that this took, like you put, you've been so supportive, and you've waited so patiently and been so kind, and I really appreciate that. It's sadly, getting sick was just something that happened, and it really set me back in a lot of ways. It's not just with certain things that I owed the community, like this orchestration challenge and so on, but like a lot of other things in my career and my life and everything else, my health, health affecting health. But it's just so great to have to have looked at this excellent work that you've done. And I know I've been picky, and I've said, hey, have you thought of this, or have you thought of that, or watch out about pushing that instrument into that area, or or whatever, pianissimo on a low B flat on on your oboes and so on. But like that doesn't mean that it's not scored well, right? I think it's just a brilliant piece of orchestration. So just fix it up a little bit, right? And see if you can, get some people to play it. I think that it would be really, really great. In fact, just like it's one of the standout things about like these kind of longa and dotted longa scores is there's just like, why am I giving everybody enhanced evaluations? Is because I want them all to get performed, and I feel that they have a chance, right? So that's my thoughts about that. And just quite quite wonderful effort. And yeah, I'm just you may be looking back at this and think, oh well, that was me 2 years ago, and I'm so much I know so much more now, and I progressed so much, and I've done all these other things, and it's almost like looking back a little bit, with nostalgia, or like that doesn't even feel like me anymore, right? And I feel that way sometimes with my older efforts and orchestrations, and even like a lot of my early videos that have so many views on them just because they've been around for goodness me, 16 years now. Like looking back at them, I think, oh boy, that's I don't feel like I'm that same creator anymore that sat down, in front of a very cheap handheld camera with a video function turned on and just recorded myself talking off the top of my head. Now things are more scripted or more organized, and they're I have grown too. So anyways, I hope that you continue to to exercise your brilliance Gabi, because just definitely you have got a knack for orchestration and you're doing wonderful work. So everybody, if this wasn't enough for you, there will be another video tomorrow, and I will talk a little bit more, as I mentioned at the end of that intermission, talk a little bit more about octaves in between double basses and wind or brass instruments. And we are going to look at a really great score by Klaus Ferretti. So I hope you can join me for that. Thanks, everybody. You guys are awesome. I'll see you really soon.